那今天晚上的 hosting 是 IvyCompass 的中文呢叫指南针教育咨询。那我们呢是在搭建一个 ecosystem，我跟我们的 team，我们是立志于将北美一些口碑最好的前招生官，还有独立的升学顾问为核心，通过帮助他们申请美高、美本、美研和美博。同时，因为在升学的道路上面，孩子们需要各个方面的支持和增强他们的竞争力，所以呢，我们还匹配了为艺术生、音乐生、体育生，还有包括 AP 啊、科创啊、物理呀、AP、SAT 等等，在高中期间所需要的一些教育资源，我们都通过我们跟他们的对接，保证他们是认真负责的一些导师和机构，通过跟他们的连接，把这些服务能够介绍给我们全球的华人家庭。所以呢，增强了这样的一份信任度。我们甚至于现在看到有些家庭从4年级、5年级已经开始对接我们这边的资源和导师，来帮助孩子更好的。通过这样的一个分享和通过这样的一个辅导，能让孩子在这个求学的道路上面和成为一个比较对社会有用的人道路上面，增强他们的这个竞争力。那所以呢，因为我们跟 AFI 这种连接呢，我们还会提供一些志愿者的这个机会，还有一些社会影响力、科研和实习背景。等一会儿今天晚上，Professor Ahn 在介绍完他的这些信息和内容以后，我也会跟大家介绍我们 IvyCompass 的实习和 research 的一些项目。那我们的宗旨呢是不仅仅升学，说的是升学，但是我们希望通过升学这样的一个杠杆和这样的一个平台和这样的一个事件，在做的过程当中，因为有高级导师他们的 wisdom 和他们的 strategy thinking，那可以帮助孩子能够在这条求学的路上，能够让自己更加知道如何把时间花在对的事情上面，不要东一榔头西棒子做很多的事情，但是没有主线，让孩子们能够在升学的上面能够把时间花的比较对、高效。从而还获得很多 soft skill 的成长空间。举例说，如果我看到孩子们发的邮件不是特别的 professional，那我们可能会主动打个电话来教孩子说这件事情你应该这么回答，或这件事情你该主动跟导师汇报。总而通过这一系列的长期的3年的、2年的、1年的或4年的陪伴，我们的孩子真的是在高中毕业的时候更加成熟了。这是我们非常看到可喜的，也是我们的工作重点和核心。那2024年、2025年的录取的结果，大家可看每一个学校你所 name it，我们都有我们的孩子的身影啊，所以我们的导师可以说不但是他们能够帮助孩子去 Dream School NYU，我们也可以帮助孩子去CMU 或者是 Stanford 或者耶鲁，因为每个孩子的志向和每个孩子所能具备的这个 competitive 的 portfolio 是不一样的，有的孩子可以推得远一点，有的孩子可能这个就是各个方面的因素。就只能够或者是他的 dream 就是去一个liberal arts school，那我们的导师都是能够根据孩子的自身情况来帮助他更好的去申请他的 dream school，那都有我们的影子。如果您还没有看到过我们 IvyCompass 指南针的 website 呢，是全新更新了，也欢迎您上去观看我们以往的这些导师们的精彩分享，他们的干货是满满的。我们这些做了10几年升学的人，和工作人员都能够每次通过跟这些导师们的聆听，都能够学到很多新的知识。所以我觉得，我们自己都变得更加 smart 啊。我呢一直说。孩子的天花板是在于我们家长的认知程度，很多时候不是没有这个条件，而是因为我们的认知阻碍了我们的孩子的更好的这个发展和成长。所以我真的非常 pitch 所有的家长们都应该，不管你的孩子在哪个年龄段，我甚至有些家长孩子已经申请到了学校，他们还在 hang around 我们的平台，因为他们认为在我们的平台上面真的可以吸取到很多的能量，可以成为更好的 parents。在孩子工作和生活当中，需要得到支持的时候，他们都能够非常好的那个给予支持。那今天晚上呢，我们非常荣幸又再一次的请到了Professor Ahn，Professor Ahn 呢，是一位非常经验丰富的，他首先是宾大 Wharton 商学院 Emory 大学的招生申请的审核员和面试官，同时他还参与过 Texas Austin 分校和 Pepperdine 很多大学的招生工作，所以他讲的东西，我个人感觉都是满满的干货，都是背后大家看不见的，到底他们是怎么在evaluating我们的孩子和我们的学生，我觉得可以听到非常多的内部信息啊，这个内部信息就是要知己知彼，才能百战百胜。那今天晚上呢，他会通过如何定位啊。如何冲刺啊？因为现在7月份了啊，马上就8月份、9月份，我们 ED1的这个 deadline 11月1号就要到了。我们所有导师的学生们现在7月1号都在写大文书 personal statement，是相当的这个挑战的一个阶段啊，很多工作要做。还很多 activity list 需要修改呀，还有很多的这个准备工作哈、都要开始了。另外，孩子们也在准备一些最后 summer 的一些program 啊或 research 的项目。那因为到了这个时期，所以我们请 Professor Ahn 呢来讲一讲，在这个学校在选这个学校的时候，你的考量核心因素是什么？该如何 select 你的这个 list？同时如何做好学校的调研和梦校达成的双向奔赴？意思就是说，you want to go, but you also qualify。然后怎么去做这些调研？对一些有些学生可能会想到，哎，我到了学校以后，到了大学以后，我未来第二步通过本科学习完了以后，我可能要开始准备在学期间法学。law 的这个准备，还有 pre-med 的一些方向的准备，那这些今天晚上Professor Ahn 也会涉及到。那么今天晚上I'm really truly honored and happy inviting Professor Ahn come to our IvyCompass community again. Your presentation always full of wisdom, full of knowledge, and lots of the what shall I say behind the scene knowledge, which a lot of people don't understand. If you understand that, their kids can be much easier, smoother applying for college season. So let me give the floor to Professor Ahn, and thank you very much once again to providing us that time and the energy. Thank you.
Okay, is my video on? Thank you so much, Sophia. I'm so happy to be here. It's a real honor too. So I'm hoping that whatever I'm able to say today will help somebody out there. Today's topic is specifically on putting together college lists. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you can give me 1 second to do that.
Sure.
And I have a lot to cover. If I accidentally go too fast, please let me know, Sophia.
Okay.
I decided to start off like this: dream big, but apply smart. So this is, as Sophia introduced in the very beginning. If I zoom in here, there's this word big. Okay. So the reason why I made it intentionally like that is putting together your college list is a very specific and personal exercise, I think. You don't need to talk to anybody like me. If you can just go to Google, go to Wall Street Journal, London Financial Times, or look at anybody's ranking, or you already have in mind, you have maybe a brand name school, or there's a certain other criteria like cost or location. So you don't really need me for that. Okay. So the real purpose I like to think for tonight's discussion is exactly this: finding the right balance. I really like the way that Sophia and IvyCompass worded this, because it's not simply put together a college list, because you don't need me for that. Okay. But finding a right balance. Okay. And this is not just any college list that anybody could just apply to. This is specifically for your sons and daughters, or if you're listening as a student, this is specifically for you. Okay. There's one goal for the entire college list, which is obviously success. And success means getting in to where you want to go. Okay. The problem, of course, is that's not a sure thing. And so that's where putting this college list comes into more play. So I'm going to start off by emphasizing this one word: finding it. Okay. And then we'll move on from there. Okay. So in terms of finding the right balance, okay, the way I think of this word finding it is you need to start off with, where's the source of your information going to be? Okay. So most of you already know these sources, right? If you don't, then you should. So US News and World Report is probably the most common, globally expected and reliable free database or website on the internet. Okay. There are a lot of guides out there about how to put your college list together. I don't criticize any of these guys. I think any information should be considered. Okay. But you need to be careful about what certain guides might push you towards in terms of certain kinds of lists of colleges that maybe they're focused more on engineering or business or law, or maybe they have a certain purpose in terms of undergraduate versus graduate and even postgraduate. So the guides, I think, in a nutshell, they're helpful, but they should be used with a little bit of caution. A lot of the more popular ones are Fisk, the College Board, which in the United States, the College Board is the company that administers the SAT and the ACT exams, as well as the AP exams, the College Board. Okay. You have Princeton Review, right? And then you have a whole lot of other of these guidebooks. Okay. So those are all fine. The dean's books are interesting. So you have a lot of, if you go to Amazon or any Barnes and Noble or any sort of list of books, you'll notice a lot of former dean. A dean is in the United States colleges is the head of either their department or the entire university. So you may have a dean of admissions who now retired, and then now they wrote a book, how to put your college list together, or you have a dean of academics or dean of the college, etc. Okay, so the whole point is I think the dean's books are fine; they're good sources. But again, the key is going to be to this other, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, I think primary sources are probably the best. Okay, ask actual students, friends and family. Obviously, for the students, maybe even go to YouTube and see students who post videos about why this school or why they regret this school, or things they love, things they hate about the school, etc. I think this is overlooked, but also it's sometimes misused. Okay, so it might seem obvious. Well, of course you should visit. You should look into the school, so the school website, etc. I have to go to high schools and visit high schools and represent either my Ivy League schools, the University of Pennsylvania, or Emory University, or even other schools as an alumnus or a former professor. And so when I do visit, you need to understand that those are a reflection of that school. And so there's going to be, I'll say, a certain consistency with whatever a school representative is going to say, with what's also on the website and all the publicly available information, all the published brochures, etc. Okay, so I'm not necessarily saying that it's not objective. Of course, you're going to get all the facts, but you're going to get it from the perspective of the school. But the school representatives, I think, are great in terms of they're technically I think even more than a primary, like a student who's actually there, but a representative of the school. I think the campus visits, I have my own opinion about whether or not a campus visit is necessary. In terms of how it affects your chances of getting in, can the admissions committee reader tell that you visited the campus? I mean, sometimes we can tell. Sometimes you just tell us in your essays. You even tell us that you visited. Generally speaking, we don't care. Doesn't make any difference to us. It's not going to affect your chance of getting in or not. Okay, just like a lot of other myths, but that's outside the topic of tonight's. Or that's outside of tonight's topic. As far as the school, the visit, the tour, I think is it's worthwhile. But I also recommend that you go a little bit away from the tour and do things in terms of visiting the school in its more natural state rather than the tour. I've even been involved in some tours with some of the schools that I was a professor at. I've allowed students to visit my classes, etc. Those are generally very carefully, I'll say, just carefully monitored. Okay, but go on the visit, go to the tour, strip away from the tour, go visit the library, go to the student center, go have lunch with some people who you just introduce yourself to, go out on the quad. There might be some students sitting in a circle under a tree. Go introduce yourself. Go to an event afterwards. Colleges are always having events, whether they're academic or not. So get in terms of eventually finding sources for putting your college list together. I think the school is a great one. Okay. In terms of this other, and I'm going to emphasize the other, which is the last thing for every one of these criteria. I think for the other, this all of these sources may be pretty broad and pretty open. It's hard to, I think, be deceived by the sources. In terms of the other sources, I think I just say any and all, but be careful, especially students out there. sometimes I've noticed there's some information out there that leads to something called success bias. Success bias means if you look for something hard enough, you'll find it no matter what. Okay, so if you're trying to convince yourself or maybe your parents that you really want to go to MIT, even though you're really not that STEMmy, or you are a STEM student but also interested in liberal arts, eventually you're going to find something that says that, or that puts them in a certain ranking list, etc. I would just use those kinds of lists with caution. Okay, use your own judgment when you're using those sources. As far as the other kinds of aspects of how to find your right balance, okay, the due diligence, I think, is an important aspect of this. Due diligence means that you need to make sure that you're looking at all the information, even the things that you may not be that interested in. For example, students usually don't seem to care that much about what the college costs when putting the college list together, but parents care a lot. Okay, location, there's all kinds of other things that you may not think may matter as much, which is why I think the sources are important. The credibility of the source is pretty important too. Okay, there may be some bias, right? As I mentioned earlier, if there's a dean or a former professor or an existing student compared to maybe there's an alumnus. Suppose there's a transfer student. Okay, so I work with a lot of students who are transferring, and so you might think that some of those transfer students have, of course, a bias from the school that they're transferring away from. Okay. The other thing about due diligence is the in-process factors. What that means is colleges are constantly changing. They're creating new departments. Many of them are constructing brand new buildings. A lot of libraries are being converted away from the traditional, stacks with the books, and now they're more information technology, wireless-driven student meeting and learning centers. So those are in-process factors. A lot of other factors may include the college is creating new partnerships with other colleges. For example, NYU in Saudi Arabia, Harvard in China, MIT with Northwestern, hospitals with other universities, NASA with other STEM institutes, and so on. So these days, colleges are so much more than just a place where you go study, get a degree, graduate, and leave. Okay, so they're much more dynamic. So that's why I really emphasize these in-process factors. My own school, for example, at Emory, every semester we're either creating a brand new degree, a new program. There's a new joint venture between the law school and the business school, or the medical school and the computer science department, and so on. Okay, the in-process factors also involve the college with the rest of the community. So, for example, whenever I do a function with Wharton, which is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania, in the American banking system, they have something called the Federal Reserve System. So it's made up of very key important banks. One of those key important banks happens to be in Philadelphia, which of course is where Wharton is. So whenever I'm involved with any sort of event at Wharton, a lot of those events are going to also involve, at least the ones that I get involved with, are also going to involve the Federal Reserve Bank, which happens to be in Philadelphia as well, and so on. So a lot of these in-process factors should have a big impact on the way that you go about doing due diligence for putting your college list together. Speculation is the last thing. What speculation means is you're going to try to guess in the future what may happen. So when you're putting your college list together, I do think, and I recommend to students I work with, that they consider what they think the future direction of the school is. There's a lot of rhetoric on the website. There are a lot of videos that the deans will put out because it's their job to give an idea for what the future direction of the college is. I think another good way to find out is through speaking with alumni. And finally, if you interview with a school, then that would be good. I know some of you are thinking, well, how can I interview if I haven't even put my college list together? In the United States, there are some schools where if you just link up that school to your Common App application account, they will automatically send you an interview, even if you haven't done a single thing with the application process yet. For example, Georgetown is one of the schools that does this. Very, very good school. So anyway, this in terms of speculation, any opportunity you get, as I mentioned earlier, if somebody like me visits your high school and then we have to talk about our school, take that time to ask the question of what do you think about the future? Some of you are in the some of the fields that are really dynamic. So if you're interested, for example, in maybe literature or language arts or history, there are, of course, dynamic changes going on, but certainly not as much as the changes that are going on in the information technology, computer science departments, and all of generally the STEM departments. And so, those are good opportunities to ask your campus visitor. So while you're putting your college list together. The other thing that I want to move on to, besides just finding the right balance, is this whole right balance concept. Okay. And I really like the way that IvyCompass worded this, because like I said, anybody can just slap a list together, but finding it is a process. The right balance, I think, is a really key term. And so let's talk a little bit about how to get that right balance. Okay. I think the criteria is a logical place to start. What are you as the student going to choose or going to use in order to choose eventually your college list? And so here's some criteria, okay, that I think most people will agree with. And though I didn't mention this in the beginning of the seminar of my talk, this workshop or this seminar talk that I'm giving is a general one for anyone putting a college list together. Okay, so I've worked with a lot of different students who are already focused on specific types of college lists. Okay, so what does that mean? Some of your criteria might depend on the college type itself. For example, if you are doing a fine arts or performing arts, then obviously that's going to be a very specialized kind of college list. For example, Barnard is the performing arts school with Columbia University. Juilliard, of course, has performing arts. There's the Curtis Institute. There's the Rochester, Manhattan School of Music. It goes on, but those are very specific. If it's, for example, visual arts, right? That's also very specific. Then you're going to be looking at very specific, like Parsons School of Design, Rhode Island School of Design, Savannah College of Art, et cetera, and University of Chicago, et cetera. So these are going to be very specialized lists. The other type of list might be if you are going for a scholarship. And so I do work with students who are on scholarship, and this is for athletic or non-athletic. Okay, so I don't want to get too far off of the subject, but there are a lot of different kind of, I'll call them specialized lists, but that's not really what my intention was to discuss tonight. But my intention is to finish so that there's enough time if there are questions at the end. So if any of you are interested in specialized lists, then maybe that is something that you can ask questions at towards the end. Okay, but these other, I think, criteria, pretty straightforward. And I put them in the order that I often encounter them when I work with students, or just when I visit a high school and I'm talking to somebody, or just talking to anybody with that regard about how do you go about finding the right balance for your college list. The brand name, some parents and students, they have only 2 colleges on their list, Harvard and other, okay? I encourage people to expand their horizons, especially once you start thinking of what is it that I want to get out of college, okay? Then you start to realize that, oh, you know what? Yale's not so bad. Princeton's not so bad. Columbia, Dartmouth, UPenn, et cetera. And then when you really start thinking about it, you start realizing these so-called lower tier or second tier schools. There's nothing wrong with Johns Hopkins, right? Duke, University of Chicago, Northwestern, Rice, right, and so on, okay? And then from there, it even goes to what I would call third tier colleges, and there's nothing wrong with those either, depending on what the purpose for that school is. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later, but just to give you a heads up, for example, if your ultimate purpose may be to go to graduate school at the mid-tier level. So for example, law school is another 2 years in the United States is another 2 years after the 4-year undergraduate. MBA school, which is for business in the United States, that's another 2 years after. Okay, medical school, 4 years plus residency, et cetera. Okay, so if your goal is to go to in engineering, so for example, the highest degree in engineering is a PE degree in the United States, a professional engineer. Okay, so if your goal is actually to reach to the higher postgraduate level, then that definitely will affect your college list. And I'll give you an example. I'm also involved with the Wharton admissions for the graduate school. We do not automatically give any sort of benefit or favoritism, nor does any other college, dare I say, okay, dare I speculate, and that includes Harvard Business School, MIT, University of Chicago, et cetera. there's no particular added advantage to having gone to any particularly ranked undergraduate college. So what does that mean? If you want to go to medical school to say Yale, okay, one of the purportedly top medical schools, it doesn't automatically benefit you to have gone to an Ivy League for undergraduate. Okay, so that's a separate, more detailed topic in terms of putting that kind of college list together. But the point that I'm trying to make is you need to think more broadly and long term when you're putting this college list together, because if the undergraduate degree is not the stopping point, then you shouldn't think like that when you're putting your college list together as if that's the stopping point. Okay. There's even something, well, there's more I can talk about on that, but I would like to move on. Cost is often a factor. I think something that often gets overlooked is scholarships. Scholarships are, generally speaking, need and non-need based. Okay. The scholarships are also, generally speaking, either public or privately funded. Okay. And so the cost is something that I think should affect your college list as well. It generally makes it a little more open-ended. I encourage a lot of students that I work with who, for example, they may be wanting to go to graduate school in, say, engineering. Okay. Well, they may be better off taking a scholarship at a state school and then going to a higher ranked graduate school, as opposed to, for example, being what's often called upside down, which means suppose you go to an undergraduate school that's very highly ranked, but then for some reason you're unable to be accepted to an equally or even higher ranked graduate school. So for example, and I'll admit some of my students have done this. I work with a lot of my students that go all the way through medical school. So I've had some students get into an Ivy League, or they go to a similar school like MIT, Stanford, Caltech as an undergraduate. And then when they apply for graduate school, they end up at a place, or they end up not being accepted to similarly competitive schools, but instead they end up going to another school that may be somewhat lower, ranked a little bit lower. Okay, so with that said, the scholarships are something that I think should also factor in, not just a matter of cost, but for a matter of how it may affect your experience as a student there. And again, that's a slightly different topic. So if there's a question, I can address that, but I think I need to move on. And I think I do need to start covering things a little bit more quickly. So apologize, Sophia. I think location is something that a lot of students seem to consider. I have my own professional recommendation of whether or not location should matter. A lot of you might be surprised the first time you visit Princeton, New Jersey, or New Haven, Connecticut, and realize, boy, Yale isn't what I thought it was. Or even my school, University of Pennsylvania, West Philadelphia, not the best neighborhood to be in. Columbia, they've done a lot to improve the neighborhood. I'll say that, things like that. But, location, okay, to the extent that it can affect this student life, I think that that's often a consideration. I put this one as a symbol for, a lot of people put some goofy things in there, and that's fine too. My suggestion is you should pick any criteria. And what's the most important criteria in terms of the other? It's, I'll say, your own personal preferences. I'm not here to say that, you know what, you should pick UC Irvine because it's over 52% Asian. If that's important to you, then that's important to you. So anyway, you have to define your criteria. I think in general, these criteria are pretty universal. Okay, they should matter at least to some degree. Okay, there may be things like size. For example, when I was at the University of Texas, I had over 250 students in my small elective class. Okay, but then at a place like Emory University, fortunately, I've had some classes that have been as small as, I think, about 40 students, which is, a pretty good size. I think I've had some, very specialized courses where we had only, 2 or 3 students, but those are pretty unusual for undergraduates. As far as the other, these are pretty, I'll say, personal, or they're pretty unique. Okay. And so I try to categorize these criteria into universal and unique types of criteria. After that, I think you need to assess your criteria. Assess means how to measure your criteria. Okay. And so how would you measure your criteria? So there are a lot of rankings out there, as I mentioned, US News and World Report, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, London Financial Times. there's so many rankings out there. You're generally going to find the same names and the same ranges. Okay. The percent acceptance is something some of you need to be careful of. A lot of colleges, I won't name any, they artificially inflate their percent, the number of applications that they get in order to appear as if their acceptance rates are very selective. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about this. For some of the colleges, though, where the application pool is very competitive, I do think those are a lot more realistic. So, for example, the Ivy League schools, their acceptance rates are ranging, they're straddling generally around 4.5% to 5%. And all of them have really narrowed, as you'll see later. Awards and recognition, self-explanatory. Subsequent paths, this is what I was talking about earlier. If you are going to measure a college based on what do the graduates do afterwards. So for example, NYU, if you're interested in business, where do they go? A lot of them do end up in New York, London, or Hong Kong. If you're going to go to, say, what's another good example? Johns Hopkins, a lot of them, of course, go into research, or they go into medicine or healthcare or in government. I think the best example is Caltech. Over 75% of the students at Caltech, they go on to pursue their advanced degree and eventually become PhDs and either researchers or professors. And so, again, the subsequent path is a way for you to measure. I know at my school, at Wharton, one of my schools, they measure what percentage of the students who graduate end up going into certain fields like investment banking or consulting, corporate finance, et cetera. So that's another one. So the subsequent path, I think, is an important criteria. I think these assessments, no matter what, they should be broad. Don't omit anything. I think, the assessment of even, for example, what percentage, make up different majors, what percentage of the student body is, male and female, and what demographic, and where do they come from? I think all of that is something that you should at least consider. And then if you decide it's not important, fine. Okay, but you should at least consider all of those criteria. I think after that, the way to measure it in terms of it being the personal assessment of this should be what is important to you, so your own priority. And then also, I think you to acknowledge that this will probably change. Okay, so the way that you might think right now, rankings matter a lot. I really want to go to a college that has a big name recognition. And then you need to consider that maybe later on it may not matter as much, or you may not care as much about it. Okay. And so generally speaking, there are a lot of, depending on the career path, whether it's medicine, law, engineering, business, et cetera, it's generally said that as you advance further in your career and in your life, okay, the actual name of the school doesn't matter as much as what have you done with your experience and what do you personify now. Okay. So another topic where if there are questions, I can address that later. So generally speaking, how broadly your assessments are and how deeply you do them in terms of your own personal criteria, okay, is I think something that's important. So that's why I put breadth and depth. I think the last thing that I was going to mention was once you have your criteria and once you measure them, how are you going to go about evaluating them in order to get this right balance? And so my suggestions for that are pretty simple. You have objective ways to evaluate these things. Some people want to know, if I graduate, I spend all this money for 4 years in tuition and living and studying there, et cetera, and I graduate, I want to get a job. What's my starting salary going to be? Okay, and that's fine. Like I said, you need to be personal and very deeply consider what's important to you. And these days, this is very important. There's a lot of information out there now about trends that talk about degrees that have less value out in the career marketplace than other degrees and so on. So that might be a reality you have to deal with. The career momentum versus upside down. So this is what I was talking about earlier. You need to evaluate whether or not, if you decide, okay, I have a scholarship to the University of Georgia, and I also got accepted as a regular student to, where was she? I think it was Brown University. So this is an actual student that I'm thinking of. So she turned down the scholarship to the University of Georgia, but instead decided to go to an Ivy League school instead. And so good for her. Okay, but my recommendation was based on something different because she was bound for medical school. And so the whole idea is, how are you going to be able to get into medical school? That, well, it's going to be based on what have you done beforehand. And so what might be a greater opportunity or an easier way for you to prove that you have what it takes to go into medical school if you do that at Brown for 4 years, or you do that at a state college with the entire support of the top scholarship behind you, and so on. Okay, so that's what I mean by momentum and being upside down. This cost benefit and lifelong benefit is what I consider. Lifelong benefit is related to this, again, the other aspect, which is very personal. I call this very subjective. And why is it subjective? I'll even give you some anecdotal examples. A lot of the people that I know and a lot of people that I met happen to have gone to similarly ranked schools. For example, when I was a graduate student at Wharton, I met a lot of students who had also gone to or were at other similar schools like MIT and Harvard and Stanford and so on. Okay, and so what ends up happening is you get a lifelong benefit, in my opinion, depending on how you use some of the resources, especially the network. And so that may be something to consider. That's something that, as I mentioned earlier, when you're doing your due diligence and getting the sources of information, that's a good time to ask either your campus representative who comes, if you go to the campus on a tour, or you happen to know an alumnus or an alumna or a friend or family member who happen to go, ask them, how they leverage things. And I think you'll be quite surprised. I've lived and worked in more than 5 countries around the world. And I've always enjoyed, for example, going to, whether it's a Wharton Club of London or an Ivy League Association of Manhattan or something of that sort. Okay, so the lifelong benefit, I think, is something that should definitely affect your college list. Think of it on the other extreme. If it were just vocational, you go to a school, you learn a trade, and then you're done with it. You have no more use for that school. That's something that you should consider when you're thinking of putting your college list together. So the objective and the subjective parts of it. Okay. The last part of this, and Sophia, I apologize, I'm going to try to move along, but the last part of it, fortunately, is just this last part, which is putting your college list together. Okay. And so in order to put that college list together, we finished talking about finding things and getting the right balance, especially with the evaluation. Okay. So the last thing is, how do you put this final college list together? So I was going to start off with what I think hopefully will add a little bit of levity to this. But what do these are all musicians. They're pretty old too. I couldn't find anybody newer. I happen to know these two. Okay. But anyway, what do they all have in common? They have a #1 hit song called It's My Life. Okay. And the reason why I want to emphasize that is I'm not trying to pit sons and daughters against their parents, or I'm not trying to exacerbate any tensions if there might even be some. Okay. But what I want to emphasize is when I work with students, I tell them it's your life. This is your college. This is your high school record. And this is going to be the rest of your life. A lot of these students don't know. And I do think when they put their college list together, they may even consider that the college that they go to as an undergraduate, okay, of course, it will affect things like perhaps their career, especially in the beginning. If they want to go to graduate school, it will affect that. But it can affect things that have all kinds of impacts in your life indirectly. Okay, so your career, of course, maybe who you marry, maybe where you live, maybe where your children will go to college. Okay, so it really has a lot of implications that I think people need to consider. But ultimately, I've always encouraged my students to consider that if they take ownership of it, that's how they're going to be most serious about it. How many colleges can you attend? Sounds like a trick question. That's why I wrote that. 1 at a time is what I say. So what does that mean? When you put your college list together, you may consider the chance of transferring, okay, or even doing study abroad or a co-matriculation. Okay, so transferring, that's something that I work with actually a pretty large number of students with as well. I work with transfer students on 3 levels. Number 1, I work with students who just come to me and say, I'm at this college, I want to go to another. Okay, I also work with students who want to transfer out of Emory and go to another college. And so I write a lot of recommendations, et cetera. I also, for Emory, review applications for transfer students who want to go to Emory. And I also do some other things, for example, approve credit. If you transfer from one college to another, then that new home college needs to consider how many credits will they accept from the previous college. And so they usually ask professors for that. So I do a lot of that. So I approve or I reject whether or not students can get credit for the course they took at NYU or University of Chicago or Northwestern or these other schools, whether they can come to Emory and get credit for that. So those are the three ways that I'm involved with this. And so I do think that when you put your college list together, this is something you should probably consider too. A lot of students, they may not have gotten into their dream college. Okay, so suppose they had on their list Harvard, Yale, then they had, say, Ohio State, and they had Notre Dame. Okay, so they got in only to these two. Okay, but their real goal is to get in here. They may consider on their list, okay, schools that accepted them at this level, because that may give them a higher chance to get into this school as a transfer than from Notre Dame going into here. Okay, so again, that's something that's gonna affect your college at a time. Okay, what's easier said than done? I get this a lot. I think the record, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it might have been over 30. So I'll put 29, applying to 29 colleges. Okay, so when you're putting your college list together, it's going to be hard sometimes to make a decision, but you're going to have to. Keep this in mind. You can go to only one college at a time, but keep in mind when you're putting your college list together, you need to be practical as far as how much time and effort can you put into it. Now, I know a lot of you students who are listening are thinking, hey, I'm a hard worker. I've done all this stuff in the last 3.5 years of high school, and so I can pump out as many essays. Just be careful of that. If you are going to have an inordinately large college list, I just recommend you prioritize it. Okay. The most common mistake that happens, and a lot of admissions committee readers, we can tell this, is that the student is not uniquely applying to our college. We can tell that it's a generic type of application, especially in the essays. The interview reports also scream out that this student doesn't know anything about our school, has no idea why they want to come. Why would I ever accept them? And then that's the end of the interview report. Okay, same thing with the essay. And I'm not talking about the simple mistake. I can't even tell you how many essays I've read. For example, for Emory, that say, and that's why I want to go to Duke. Okay, believe it or not, that kind of mistake gets made. Okay, and believe it or not, we actually don't mind that mistake that much. Okay, what we really mind is when the applicant doesn't take the time to understand our college. Okay, same thing happens, especially with the Ivy League schools, as you can imagine. A lot of students who are targeting the Ivy League schools, because you have very strong academic records, you may even be at the top of your class in your high school. Okay, and so you are going to be targeting several of the most selective schools. So that makes it even more important for you to be able to uniquely answer the essay and the interview questions and portray yourself as someone who really understands what each of those schools stands for, and then why you uniquely want to go to them. You'll notice that for those of you who have been at least preparing for August 1st, which is when all the applications are supposed to come out. Okay, for those of you who have been preparing by looking at old applications, which I do think is a good exercise, you'll notice that of the many common themes, one of the common themes is why us? And obviously it has to be a unique answer. Okay, so anyway, that's a different topic. That's more about essay writing, etc. But it will affect your college list. So it makes it more important for you to be able to distinguish. So with that said, if all these answers point to more practical things, for example, it's your life, right? You can only go to one school at a time. You should try to keep in mind how practical it is for how long your college list is. Okay, So how do you put the final list together? Okay, and Sophia, I promise I'm going to really go through this part because I do want to get to the questions. But so how do you compile the final college list? So here's the final answer to my talk in the seminar. Okay, first things first, early or not, here I come. So the timing of this. So should I do, there's different kinds of ED, early decision. There's different kinds of early action, early restricted action, early ESA, ERA, EA1, EA2. There's so many EAs, just like there's so many EDs now. And then there's RDs as well. Okay, generally speaking, okay, and I say this supported by data, okay, there is a misunderstanding that applying early increases your chances. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Most people think that if you apply early, you have a higher probability of being accepted. No, I can explain to you in very simple terms, but let me start off with what the data shows. Okay, most people will look at a graph like this, and what this shows is, I apologize that it's a little bit fuzzy. This says regular decision. So all these dark ones are regular, and then the hollow ones, these are early. Okay, and this is the percent accepted. Okay, so people look at this and say, oh, it's a higher percent accepted early, so I should apply early. The reason why that's wrong is for several things. Number one, colleges don't loosen their standards in the beginning. Number two, colleges are not afraid that they're not going to have enough applicants in the regular decision pool. Do you really think Harvard is afraid that no one's going to apply regular decision, therefore they need to accept more than they normally would early? Of course not. Okay. Third, and this is a little bit more statistics driven, the population of the applicant pool is generally more competitive. Okay. So if you have a higher number or the higher level of the quality of students who are applying, and you have a smaller number of those, then of course you're going to have a higher percentage of students accepted. Okay, so those are three of the main reasons, okay, that this is a complete fallacy. The idea that colleges are concerned about something called yield, yes, that's true, but no, that does not result in a higher chance of being accepted. If there's more questions on this, I think I can answer this later, but I don't want this is a little bit off topic, I don't want to get too off topic, because the acceptance rate will affect your list, but it's not the one and only idea that you need to consider. The other thing of whether you're going to do early or not, okay, is I think this, the boss, the employee, and the customer, okay, it's you. So I just want to reiterate, I want to re-emphasize, this is your life, this is your application. Okay, so compiling that final list, I know there are many sons and daughters out there who are required to do whatever their parents tell, and I generally recommend you always do that. Okay, but ultimately speaking, I say that mom, dad, even the rest of the world, okay, the winner is really everyone. Okay, but you are the one who has ultimate accountability for it. And so when you compile your list, and only when I am asked, I do recommend that they put this over that, but that doesn't mean that this is not important. Okay, and the final thing I'll say is the single most important factor, and this is where I'm going to end the seminar, or really what I have to say is this point, and I have a couple of data charts to show you about this. The single most important factor in finding all of this, the right balance in your college list, is getting in. You need to have a serious and, I believe, realistic assessment of your chance of getting in. I think this is simple logic, but a lot of people don't like to deal with this. I've worked with students who think that applying to an Ivy League school is there's some randomness to it. So they think, well, let me just go ahead and apply to all 8 of them, because who knows, maybe I'll get lucky. It doesn't make sense to do that. Okay, the probability of getting into a school should factor in, for example, with backup schools, okay, or target schools, even reach schools when you prioritize them. Okay, so what is the chance of me getting in? I think is the single, if I had to pick the single most important factor, it would be the chance of getting in. Okay, so then that's the real question. Then what's your chance of getting in? How do you know what your chance of getting in is? So let me paint a couple of pictures, first of all. Here are the acceptance rates, as I mentioned, of colleges This is from the last, many years, from 2012. So they're all gravitating towards around this level, which is at about 4.5%, as I mentioned. Okay, and these are just the Ivy League schools, of course. Okay, and then others, these are kind of the benchmarks because these are the lowest percent acceptance rates. The other thing in terms of focus on your chance of getting in is what I call SAT equivalencies. Okay, so what that means is there are two very interesting studies that were published. There are many others that are out there, but these are the two that I think are most telling. What this says is these SAT scores are equal. Okay, and so according to this Princeton study, which is the white box, this says that if a Black person scored in this area, which looks like about 1270, 1280, then that means a Hispanic person has to score a little bit higher to be equal to this person. That means a white person has to score a tiny little bit higher to be equal to this person and a lot higher to be equal to that person. Okay, this is not a racial, derogatory, discriminatory anything. This is a Princeton study that I'm simply relaying the information for. And so you're, of course, encouraged to even look up the study and read it on your own if you like. Okay, what I think is interesting is two things. Number one, Asians have to score over 1,500 to be considered the same score as other people. Okay. The second thing that I think is even more interesting is this dark box. That's the later study. So about 5 years later, somebody else at another university conducted a similar study. And here's what they found. Some of these groups can score even lower, while other groups have to score marginally even higher. Okay, so what's the dismal outlook of that? It just means things are getting tougher, just like this says. Okay, so that makes this focusing on your chances of getting in all the more important in putting your list together. Okay, and I think that should make sense. If you had no chance of getting in, or you suppose somehow you had a magic ball and it said you had 0 chance of getting in, why would that be on your list? If you had a really high chance of getting in and it was a school that you really liked, of course it should be on your list. Okay, and everything in between. Okay, so I think the last chart that I was going to show before I conclude was this one. Okay, so the admissions factor importance. So again, focus on your chances of getting in. A lot of you are looking on Google and the internet and noticing, oh, I don't have to worry, for example, about my essay or my activities or something, and you'll find the right answer, but then you also find the other answer. And so I just wanted to show this that says focusing on your chances of getting in. It's not as simple as you think. I can't tell you how many students I've run into who have close to a 1600 or a 36. They've taken 16 APs and gotten 5s on all of them, and they're usually an officer of something, president, captain, vice president, founder, or something. Okay, why are these students getting rejected versus others who have far less? Okay, and the answer is there's a whole lot more than just these three factors. Okay, so with that said, I just want to conclude. And Sophia, I really apologize for finishing so late, but I'm almost done. So the conclusions are very simple. I think everyone, you can read them on your own. Okay, but the one that I will emphasize the most is this one. And so with that said, let me move on to this slide. I was happy to take questions. I know that I guess we're almost out of time, but I can stay for about 15, maybe even 20, I think about 15 minutes for questions if there are any. But again, thank you for having me, Sophia. I apologize for running over time.
Not at all, not at all. Everything I think you said is very good information. A lot of things people heard it, but they don't want to believe it. Somehow I found a lot of Asian family are very left a lot of memory from China. Like the China, emphasize on STEM. They feel if you're learning STEM, then you can go on having good job, making good living. And also in China, there's a lot of perceptions in China they left and carry on until coming here. But this is a different environment, very different than what you're in China, just going to Gaokao, just the score able to put you into some sort of different tier of school. 211 and 985 kind of thing. And also there's another perception is In China, you have to carry a major going to colleges, but US doesn't. So whatever knowledge you share with everybody, it's good to emphasize, maybe multiple times you hear it, they will change their perception.
Okay.
So, okay. Anyone have questions? I see there's some, but I encourage everybody listing your question into the box, but list to everyone so everyone can hear and also see your questions. But if you wanted to have a personal dialogue, let's say if your student, your kids have a specific question, you would like to engage with Professor Ahn, you happen to raise your hand. Raise your hand. I will be very happy to open mic and for you to have dialogue. So Professor Ahn have very busy day. So he might be having, 20, 30 minutes to answer questions. Okay. So, and also before I answer questions, hold on 1 second. I want to share my screen and that way I can quickly do a little bit advertisement if you allow me a little bit. IvyCompass, we also have a internship program that obviously have to be under the guidance of Professor Ahn, like consultant like Professor Ahn. They will be able to guide our student to see if you need to do research program or if you need to do internship or you need to go to leadership or you need to go to do other type of summer program or competition. So the IvyCompass leadership is in all different kind of field. We are in tech, finance, media, engineering, machine learning, AI, consulting, mental health, you name it. So just get in touch with us. On the end, I'm going to show you a barcode. You can scan the barcode and get in touch with me and Joycelyn, and they will be able to connecting with the internship opportunity. Okay, you can start. We start like 5 times a year. We have a summer cohort. We also have fall. But anyway, come to us. We'll be able to make that arrangement for you. We also have a very good internship research program. The research program, you can see there different tiers. Usually conduct 3 months. Sometimes also can be longer, but with more fee involved. And the lowest one, most economic one, is $2,990 for 3 months research. Will be guided by PhD. You can also publish your paper for the research, then it's 5,900. So if you are interested in doing a research program, maybe you were saying to me, oh, I don't know, my kids doesn't know how to do research. But let me tell you, if you want to go to applying for Ivy League school, like school, research is must. It's not as difficult as thought, meaning usually research is online. We don't have to conduct in person in the lab. Usually we can do public policy related research guided by PhD. You kids will learn how to structure the thesis and also the research structure papers and also learn how to conduct that kind of type of research. So come to us, we will be able to connecting you with a research type of program. You kids might be help themselves to be more competitive. Okay, the last page before I answer question for Dr. Ahn, you're welcome to continue put on the chat box. If you have not get into IvyCompass WeChat group, I have some parents ask me, do we have a recording? Yes, we will. Usually about a couple days or a week, we will have a recording for this tonight's presentation put on the WeChat group to share with you. And so you can get into our, scan the barcode on the left-hand side, be part of our community, you will have a recording. That way you also have his PPT, okay? But if you think Dr. Ahn is very knowledgeable and his style is very much what you're looking for, you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side and that will let you fill the form. And if you fill the form, then our team, Joycelyn, me, or Allison, whoever the person will be follow up with you to schedule a 30 minutes free consultation with Professor Ahn, so you can ask him personal questions to evaluating further he is the one for you to helping your kids for the college application journey or not. Okay, so I'm gonna leave here. And also, like I said, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to open up your mic. But right now, we're going to get into the question. So yeah, Professor Ahn, let me give you the first question from Sarah.
Sure.
A student is interested in pursuing medical school in the future. They have 42 unweighted GPA, is enrolled in the IB courses, serve as sports team captain, leads 2 clubs, participated in a selective summer program, and volunteered at a hospital during 1 summer. Would you recommend applying early decision on Brown? Let me see. Hold on a second. Okay.
Right.
It jumped a little bit. Okay. Do you recommending applying early decision for Brown University pre-med program or the University of Pennsylvania pre-med program? What do you think realistic goal?
Okay, so a couple things. Number one, that's an excellent background, but the differentiating factor is how prepared and mature is this applicant in terms of making the decision that they truly want to be a physician. So I think this is too big of a question for me to answer all in just a few minutes, but let me try my best. So number one, okay, show that maturity and you truly understand what it means to be a physician. Number two, this person really needs to understand how that AMCAS is put together. And if you don't know what the AMCAS is, then you can look that up on your own. Number three, I strongly recommend that you understand why students who get into medical school decide to drop out or stop. Okay. If you don't know the reasons why someone who's great enough to apply, get in, and even go through the first or even the first 2 years of medical school, and then they either drop out, they're unable to make it, or they stop, then you're not ready to accept what that journey even is. So you need to understand the complete picture of what it truly means to be a medical school student. Number three, what I'll recommend is in terms of the trend for some of these programs, what I've at least noticed is that there's a trend to reverse them. So 5 years ago, there were a whole lot more of these EAP and BSMD programs. And again, if you don't know what they are, then you can look them up, or you should know them since you're asking the medical school question. So there's a trend to be doing away with them. The second trend is that those that were accepted, they're going to finish those out and no longer accept anymore. And then the existing programs, for example, I think you mentioned Brown. So Brown has the PLME program. Okay, so what's an interesting statistic that they don't really advertise, but the students who struggle and the students who unfortunately may not pass certain milestones like step exams, or they may even leave the program outright, they're the PLME students. Okay, and so you need to think from each college's perspective. In the 80s and 90s, the acceptance rates for colleges were a lot higher, and the dropout rate was a whole lot higher. Now it has reversed. They've done something called front-ending the application process, which means getting in is a whole lot more rigorous. And those who do get in, the success rate, the graduation rate is a whole lot higher than it was 20, 30 years ago. So what does that mean? The college is very selective on who they admit into their medical program. And once you're in, they are investing in your success. They are doing everything they can to make sure you are successful. Okay. Yet still students fail out. And a lot of them are the BSMD EAP students. So you need to really consider that. I'll say the fifth and last thing, and I promise, Sophia, I'll finish it up on this question because we got a lot of questions. But the fifth and last thing is you need to ask yourself, what's the difference between going 4 years and then many students take a gap year and then go to medical school, or going 4 years and going straight into medical school? What's the difference between that and still going 4 years and you're still in the same school, but you're going to go to the same school for medicine, okay, which some people don't think is necessarily an advantage, okay? And then the next thing is you still have to do some of the things. For example, if you don't also have to take the MCAT, that doesn't mean you don't have to know it, obviously. You still have to do all of the rigors of that. And so I think that's one of the most common mistakes. I've been working with high school students applying to EAP and BSMD programs, okay, as well as undergraduate students applying to medical school as well. Okay, so that's my own professional opinion of that. Sorry, that's it for that, Sophia. What was the next question?
Next question. Okay, thank you very much.
I'll be shorter. I'll be shorter.
No, that's okay. No, do the best. And I think we still have time. For Melody, if one gets deferred in ED or EA, does that mean the chance of getting accepted in RD is very little?
No. What happens is, this is very carefully worded too. So of course, there's about 6,000 colleges in the United States. So I don't speak for all 6,000 of them, but for the vast majority, the way the deferral works is your application has already been evaluated. Okay. And just in a nutshell, what happens is there's 3 stages for you to get in. The first stage is your application gets screened. If it passes that, it gets scored. If it passes that, it goes to committee, and then we vote on it. Okay, so in the scoring stage, your application gets chopped up into pieces. And somebody like me has to score your transcript, okay, or I have to score your activities, your awards, teacher recommendation letter, essay, interview, all the little pieces, each of those gets scored by somebody. Okay, so once that application is scored and evaluated and it goes to committee, we vote whether you are accepted or rejected. Okay, and so in terms of early, the rejection means there's different kinds of rejection. There's conditional, direct, etc. And then there's deferral. Okay, there's even waitlist and so on. Okay, so if you were deferred, your application is just going to be you're not going to get a rejection or a wait list. What happens is when the regular decision applications come, okay, they get scored, right? Your application does not get reevaluated, okay? Even though you have usually in the January to February period, they send you an email that says if there's any new update, you know, oh, now you're president, or now you're a captain, or you have a higher SAT or whatever, okay? So you send that information in. Usually that information doesn't change your score. Okay, so if your transcript has been scored, and then now you took another AP exam and then say you got something, or you took the national Spanish exam or whatever, okay, it's very rare that the application is going to be reevaluated. So your transcript, your application score is set. So what happens is when all the other literally thousands of for UPenn, we estimate it's going to be around 60,000 of them coming in. Those get scored. And again, the scoring, as you can imagine, a computer does this. It just decides, okay, these are now going to be accepted regular. These are going to be accepted. You know, a waitlist is a type of acceptance. Okay. And then obviously there's no more deferral after the regular decision. So you're simply rejected, but you were never reevaluated. So I think it's helpful for you to understand a little bit from the inside how your application typically gets reviewed that way. So that way, I'll finish my answer with this one comment. So what? You know, what does it matter that I know that from the background? The way I think that matters is that should affect how you decide when you're going to apply. I get a lot of questions by students who say, well, I really want to apply early action or early decision, even though I wish I had another week to write my essay. Or, oh, I'm still going to do this competition. I wish I had some more time. My recommendation is always put your best application forward, regardless of the timing, number one. Okay. And then number two, there's no such thing as, even though this is not my best application, let me apply early, because then even if I don't get accepted, maybe I'll just get, you know, waitlisted or deferred. No, it's not the way your application gets reviewed. So always just think of what's your best application. And if you cannot make the deadline, don't make the deadline. Okay, go ahead and do regular. Okay, so anyway, that's the actionable suggestion I have for that. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very, very reasonable. Okay, next question is from Laura. Any suggestions for Asian girl aiming for pre-med? Will brown better than rice? Is she got a way higher chance getting into the rice?
Okay, so that's impossible to answer, the probability of getting in. I also, number two, generally don't answer that question. I think anyone who answers that question in the way it is asked, it's too speculative. Okay, and what that means is for me to gamble and say, oh, I think you have a 33.2% chance of getting, it doesn't make any sense. Or if I say you have a 50% chance of getting it, well, then why is it a 51 or 49%? It doesn't make any sense. So that's number two. Number three, what I tell my students is I will assess their background and then I'll compare it to other students I've worked with. And so, for example, the person who just asked this question, maybe they have an SAT that's I don't know, say 1540. maybe they're a 7x5, which means they took 7 AP exams, they got a 5 on all of those. And then there may be a 3x4. So then they took 3 more AP exams and they have 4s on those. Okay. So they have, the 10 with the exams that are 4 to 5. Okay. They're captain of this, president of that. They do various activities, etc. And what I'll do is I'll compare that background with other students I've worked with, and I'll simply give them the data, the facts. And a sample of data fact would be, I have worked with a student who has a lower SAT than you, who has fewer APs, lower AP scores, and lower activities. And here are the schools that they got in. Okay, so I just give that data, and then that student can decide if they want to gamble and say, oh, I have a 100% chance to get that. I think that's an irresponsible way to answer that. There's no such thing as 100%. I've had students who got accepted to their Ivy League school, and then they got rejected. Like I had one guy accepted to Harvard. He was rejected from Vanderbilt. Okay, there's nothing wrong with Vanderbilt. And I'm not saying Harvard knows everything, but my point is you can never predict exactly what's going to happen.
Thank you. That is so true. Okay, next question from YL. Could you please elaborate on the medical school selection? Do you mean it is easier to get into better medical school by going to less competitive undergrad?
No. So the key to getting into medical school, at least in my experience, is to show or to demonstrate through your experience and your accomplishments that you have the qualities that the admissions committee is looking for. So then the question becomes, is it easier to demonstrate those things at a less competitive school? I think number one, yes, in general, but number two, it's not so much less competitive school. The example that I used was this student, she had an acceptance to an Ivy League school. Actually, that was not her only Ivy, but that was the one because it was Brown pre-med or PLME. The reason why I recommended the full scholarship is most people don't understand what a scholarship path is. Most people think a scholarship is, oh, I get free money, free tuition. If it's a bigger scholarship, I get the free dormitory, free food. And the biggest one is, oh, they even pay me extra money for school supplies and expenses and having fun. That is true, but that is not the reason to pick a scholarship. The college specifically picks these scholars because they represent the best of what the university is. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when you accept that scholarship, you even have to sign a contract usually that agrees you're going to agree to be interviewed. You agree to be on the website. They're going to take your picture. You're like a spokesperson for the best of the university. The other thing is they invest so heavily in your success. Okay, even if you struggle, you're going to be made successful. As a professor at Emory, our top scholarship program is called the Woodruff Scholarship. Woodruff is the founding family of Coca-Cola Corporation, so you can imagine how big that scholarship is. Okay, so I'm not only one of the interviewers and one of the final round judges, but I also I'm required to mentor a Woodruff scholar. So that means, I think most people know what mentoring means. And so what I've noticed is even if the student doesn't seem to be that high of a caliber, or for whatever reason they're struggling, the program will make sure that they're successful. It's kind of like how the president of the United States is never going to be homeless, no matter what happens. Okay, and so the university is going to make sure you're successful. And then the third and last thing I'll quickly say is what I've noticed is a lot of the scholarship programs, whether it's the public or private, or any of the need or non-need based, you're on a different track. Your path at that university is kind of a different journey. You have earlier priority access to courses. The professors, you get more advisors with professors. Your study abroad options are greater. I mean, your research opportunities are earlier. It's unbelievable the better advantages that you get as a scholar. I call it being like on the VIP program at a college. Okay, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of these the programs, like at Johns Hopkins, of course at Brown, my school, University of Pennsylvania, Duke, University of Chicago. These scholarship programs are unbelievable, and so I think a lot of students they're a little confused, or they're misled by thinking, oh, I got into Princeton. It was my dream school. I don't want a scholarship at, Pepperdine or something like that. They don't really think big picture as an adult. This is why I mentioned putting that list together. You might even consider, I don't expect a 17-year-old to think about, well, what career am I going to have 20 years from now? Who am I going to get married? What college is my children going to go to? I don't expect you to think about that, but it is part of it. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. The next question I think I can even answer. Asking you recommending 29 school application school. That's actually a lot. What Professor Ahn says is every single college school you're applying for, it's a lot of work, a lot of essay to write, and students are so busy in high school. I don't think there's a need. You're only going to one school. I see average our student applying for 10, 15.
Yeah,
I don't
that was
see
I think that
29.
was a misunderstanding. I gave an
Yeah.
example. I gave an example. In 15 years, the student I had apply to the most, I think, was 29. That's the example. I wasn't recommending everybody,
No.
but I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%, Sophia. Also, yeah, 10, I think around that range, 10 to
10,
15 at the most.
15.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you strategy right, working
yeah,
with Professor on like that,
yeah,
strategy correctly, balance the list. You don't have to apply so many. Truly,
yeah,
you don't have to really. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good. I know that answer as well. Okay. Next one is from Ya. Could you talk about what school or major would prepare student for law school?
Okay. There's an interesting I'm going to have two answers for that. Okay. So number one, that empirically, if you look at the data, what are the most common majors in undergraduate to go pursue either a JD, which is the law degree, or the JD MBA, which is the law business degree. Okay. So those are both the same. So the most common ones are now STEM majors. So that's very interesting data because in the 90s and before, it was more of the analytical humanities. So philosophy, history, literature, some of the foreign language literature-based ones, et cetera, sociology, anthropology. Now it's engineering, computer science, especially computer science. Okay, I see that one pop up a lot. I think, so that's number one, that answer. Number two, okay, so I'm most familiar, of course, with Emory Law School. So Emory Law School is actually ranked pretty highly. Okay, and so what I've noticed from just hearing through their admissions is anything that proves, okay, not just the qualitative analytical ability, okay, but the quantitative analytical ability. So that makes sense now why engineering, not math, engineering and computer science, because the person who asked this, if you consider what do those majors demonstrate, it's not just the quantitative problem solving ability, it's the analytical ability. So I would encourage you to consider any major that shows off both qualitative and quantitative analytical ability, your aptitude, okay, and your acumen, okay. And if you don't know what those mean, you can look them up. But those are three very different kinds of intelligence. Okay, so anyway, I'll leave it at that. And I apologize, Sophia. I have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Okay.
And I think it's my fault that we went almost half an hour over. But anyway, I have to actually
Yeah,
10:30.
that's okay. Yeah, I think the next question actually is very good. Is there any value for ED or EA if the chance of an acceptance is the same versus regular decision?
Oh, the benefit to that, there really isn't, I think, other than just getting it out of the way. And usually you don't, because the timing of the decision for the ED is a lot of times too close to the deadlines for the RD. So you still have to do them anyway. Okay. So, there really is, in my opinion, there isn't any benefit. Okay. And I think the data speaks for that as well. Yeah, I'll give you an interpretation. I don't think this is a personal opinion, but my interpretation is because from our perspective, we want to fill up our classes as early as possible because it removes the uncertainty. And so it is my belief that a lot of colleges use this notion that maybe there's a higher chance to get in if you apply early in order to encourage the higher quality candidates to apply earlier so we can go ahead and get those people in. Okay. And so why do colleges care? There's no college that has a 100% yield. Yield is the percentage that every college calculates how many students matriculate compared to how many students were accepted. Okay, matriculate means they pay the deposit, they actually go to the college. Okay, so for example, Yale does not have a 100% yield. Why? Because a lot of people apply to Yale and Harvard, and a lot of people who get into Harvard, they may also get into Yale. Guess where they go? If they go to Harvard, now Yale has somebody that they accepted, but the student said no. So now their yield is less than 100% and so on. So clearly there are a lot of schools that have yields that are far lower than 100%. And so we are interested in trying to make our yield as high as possible because it really is disruptive to just the way that we run the university. So that's my belief as to why students are led to believe that there's an advantage when in fact there isn't one.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, one more last question. I just want to remind the parents, if you really think about Professor Ahn, it will be the right fit for you, for your family, and also your kids. You can scan the barcode on the right-hand side. That way you fill the form. You can have 30 minutes of further understanding Professor Ahn's consulting style. You can scan the barcode on the right-hand side. Also, if you're not, obviously continue stay with us. We will continue inviting Professor Ahn come to our presentation. Then you can have a more chance understanding his philosophy. Okay, last question. I choose this one. What role does alumni interview play in the admission process decision? Some AO from certain school told us it does not impact decision at all. Does getting an alumni interview means the student already passed the first round of admission screening, now has a slightly better chance to get in?
Okay, so the simple answer is there were a couple questions in there. So first of all, yes, it does matter. No, it does not mean that you're already past any sort of screening or separate stage. And then there's a couple of things I think I need to clarify. Okay, so if you Google or talk to an admissions officer or a campus visitor, you're going to get every answer that you can imagine, from no, it doesn't matter, to yes, it's the most important thing. Okay, the thing that reconciles this was the graph that I showed earlier. If you looked at some of those things, even like the essay, the transcript, at times it matters a lot, at other times it doesn't matter at all. So if you recall, the person asked the question, if you recall, I explained that most colleges have 3 stages to get in. You're screened, you're scored, and then we vote in committee. Okay, so in that the scoring stage is when your interview report will get scored. So whoever interviews you, whether it's alumni, admissions officer, or other, like me, like I'm a professor, but I just enjoy doing interviews. Okay, I used to enjoy it. I don't do it as much anymore, but that interview report will be scored. Okay, and so before committee, it doesn't really matter as much. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people may not even look at it. Okay, but once you're in committee, they're only, generally speaking, the 3 things that a committee person will look at before voting. It's not the SAT score. Okay, it's not the minutia where we dig in. Wait, what did they get on the AP, environmental science? Was it a 3 or a 4? We don't look at that. There are only 3 main things, and the interview report is one of them. Okay, and why? Because it's subjective. Okay, and so the subjective part of it is something that the final admissions committee voters are really trying to consider. Because if there was a question about your SAT or your ability to do schoolwork, your application never would have gone to committee in the first place. It's already finished. Okay, so that's why the interview actually doesn't matter in the beginning. It matters a lot later on. The other thing is, I think the question was, does the alumni interview matter? That depends on the school. For example, Cornell at one point was using students, like actual seniors and juniors in the undergraduate college, to do the admissions interviews. Okay, that was a disaster. They got rid of that. They got rid of that year. Okay, and then, but generally speaking, the interview report is weighed based on how it's written, not who wrote it. Okay, so for example, if I write an interview report that says, hey, I would love to have this kind of student in my class, that weighs a lot because I'm a professor. Who else are you going to ask about what kind of student should we have? But if there are other, for example, alumni who might ask or who might write a report, and they're very specific about it, that will weigh a lot. If the alumnus or the alumna does not write a very good report, then it's not going to weigh very much. So when you Google things or when you hear an AO say something, one thing or another, you cannot automatically dismiss it and say, well, it doesn't matter. If you believe that, why don't you try not showing up to your interview and see if it makes a difference, or say something inappropriate, see if it makes a difference. It absolutely is recorded. Okay, so a lot of it just depends. So I'm sorry to be somewhat nebulous about it, but it's true. The interview report, it matters sometimes. It doesn't matter at other times, depending on the stage that you're in. Okay, and then the way that it's written matters a lot. And unfortunately, you don't have control over that. Okay, you don't know if your interviewer is going to write a good interview report or not. And so that's even something I work with on students too. Can you speak in the interview to make sure that certain things get written down? Okay, a lot of you debate mock trial and model UN people know exactly what I'm talking about, or I think you do. Okay, anyway, Sophia, my screen kind of went in and out, so I'm not sure. Yeah. Am I still connected? Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I am going to have to, I'm even beyond my beyond time.
Got it.
But thank you so much for having me, though. I hope something helped. Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely. For those parents or question were not answered, I apologize for that. And unfortunately, tonight we already have enough time of Professor Ahn. You come to our next presentation, you can continue to ask questions. A lot of the questions will be answered multiple times throughout different consultants on the presentation. So thank you very much, Professor Ahn, for your time again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Come to our platform. Listening to this knowledge, you will be able to answer a lot of the questions you are not answered tonight. Okay, and looking forward to the next presentation. Thank you. Have a good night, Professor Ahn.